What's going on, guys? My name is Ryan. Happy New Year. I hope you guys are having a great 2025 so far. We're going to dive back into 2024 and talk about the worst movies that I saw in 2024. And just a little tidbit before we get into this list, I had a goal this year of seeing 200 movies, and I saw a total of 221 2024 movies. That includes theater, streaming, and screeners. So I completely smashed that goal. I had a total of 51 movies that I ranked on my worst list that got a score of 1.5 to half-star ratings, and I'm going to give you 20 of those movies and 10 dishonorable mentions. So let's get right to it. So as I said, we'll first start off with dishonorable mentions. Madam Web, I Saw the TV Glow, The Beekeeper, Never Let Go, Lisa Frankenstein, Sleeping Dogs, The Exorcism, Bagman, The Strangers Chapter 1, and Imaginary. Now we're getting to the top 20, and just to let you know, if you are interested in seeing the full rank list for all 51 movies, I will leave a link for my Letterboxd to check out that said list so you guys can see all 51 movies ranked. So let's get into the top 20. Number 20, starting off with Craven the Hunter. This is no surprise if you've been following the channel. Craven the Hunter was just a absolute mess of a script. I didn't care for anything that was really going on in this movie. I mean, it did have some decent action in this movie, but just the ADR in here, and there's just so many characters like Russell Crowe that puts on a bad performance, Ariana DeBose that really has nothing to really work with here, and Aaron Taylor Johnson, I definitely felt sorry for him. This movie all around is for sure on a lot of people's lists, so no surprise at number 20 that Craven the Hunter is here. At number 19, we have Megalopolis. This movie I just recently watched. I wanted to skip this in theaters. This thing is a mess from start to finish. The way that this movie is actually shot, it looks absolutely gross the way it's actually shot. Just the plot and what's really going on in the movie, I didn't care for it whatsoever. Just some of the dialogue is pretty laughable too in the movie, and it just didn't work all around at all for me. At number 18, we have a movie that a lot of people really did like, and I absolutely hated it so much that I went on a rant, and it was one of my most viewed videos for this year here on YouTube. That movie is called Challengers, directed by Luca Guadagnino. I can tell you this, he directed Bones and All, and I didn't like that one either. I like to call that Snores and All. This movie, I just didn't care for it whatsoever. The nonlinear plot, I'm usually a fan of, but I wasn't a fan of that plot here. The whole sexy triangle love story, it didn't work for me whatsoever. The music in the theater was absolutely way too loud. I was thumping. I've had other people say that that wasn't the case for them, but man, the music is so annoying. It's so loud. At times, characters will be talking and the music is over thumping their dialogue. I mean, overall, this movie just drove me crazy, and that's why I went a rant on YouTube about it. It's absolutely horrible, and when this director actually has any new movie coming out, I'm definitely going to be very cautious of anything that he puts out. Number 17, we have a movie called Time Cut. This was on Netflix. It is the wannabe totally killer. This movie is just so bad. I didn't care for the plot whatsoever. It tried to be a slasher. It didn't work. It tried to be hip and cool, I guess, for like the teenagers. But it is another Netflix trash movie that didn't work for me whatsoever. And I honestly don't remember too much about it. But I remember the mask and some of the ways that they tried to make this so cool, and they tried to have this whole time thing, like Back to the Future type thing, but it didn't work whatsoever. Totally Killer did it much better. Number 16, we have a movie called A Sacrifice. This movie has Eric Bana in it, and I feel very sorry for this guy because he's a good actor. He's always in bad movies. In this movie, I honestly don't remember too much about it, but I remember it had something to do with this cult and what they were actually wanting. I don't know, it just didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. It's a very slow burn movie, super boring. I almost fell asleep watching it. Definitely avoid this one. Number 15, we have The Beast Within. Now, I was really looking forward to this movie. It's a werewolf movie. You know, I'm kind of half and half on werewolf movies, but this movie, oh my gosh. There's no werewolf until the last 10 minutes of the movie, and it's disguised more so as a drama abuse relationship. It was shot decently well, but when the werewolf comes on screen, it just had me laughing a little bit. I mean, it's just a bore to sit through. It's one of the most boring movies that I've watched all year. And as a werewolf movie, it completely fails, and it lied about its premise, to be honest. It's just pretty much an abuse movie and just a drama movie. It's not really a horror movie whatsoever. Sure, it has some darker parts, but it didn't work at all. It was a huge piece of crap. Number 14, we have Miller's Girl. Now, I was intrigued to check this out because of Jenna Ortega, but it pretty much had no marketing whatsoever. So much that only one theater in my town actually was playing this. And I have about a dozen theaters in my town. They only played about 2 showings per day. And after about 4 days, this movie was already out of theaters. This movie was so boring. Now, you had a character played by Jenna Ortega in which she is crushing on this teacher. They apparently have this fantasy type of relationship that's really going on. There's a few other things going on as well, but the ending is absolutely horrible. It's one of the most weirdest endings and just very uneventful endings that I've seen at a theater this year. And just a drag to really get through. There wasn't really much to really grasp onto with the story here. It just completely sucked, and I believe it's on Netflix now. Number 13, we have Daddo, starring Dakota Johnson and Sean Penn. This is basically a 90-minute car ride in which we get a TED Talk about relationships and how a old dirty man that is making some of the comments that he's making, trying to give advice to this younger girl throughout the entirety of the movie as they drive around the city. The ending is very underwhelming, and pretty much it is a movie where they are just talking back and forth, heavy dialogue about relationships and just kind of like their past and such like that. But other than that, there's not really anything else to really get out of this movie. It was not good. Number 12, we have a movie called Paradox Effect. Now, I don't remember a lot about this movie. I did get a screener for this one, but all I really remember is you had this woman who was driving around town with somebody. They were looking for these drugs or money of some kind, and majority of the movie is literally drone shots as they drive around in Italy. The movie didn't actually attract me whatsoever. The villain was completely weak. He had one cool kill in like the beginning of the movie, but after that, it's just a long slog of pretty much nothing really going on, not much action, and just basically repetitive and rinse scenes of drone shots throughout the entirety of the film. Number 11, we have Summer Camp. This movie was terrible to sit through. I was in the theater by myself, and this is basically about a bunch of old women that are going to this summer camp, and they are meeting their old enemies, and they are basically just trying to reconnect with each other and basically just have fun at the summer camp. You would think this would be a really fun movie, but it's not. It tries to go into this romantic angle, and it fails at that as well. Some of the dialogue is completely laughable, and just other things really going on in the movie is just not really that exciting. It was pretty boring, again, to watch. It's the theme of a lot of these movies. It just didn't really intrigue me too much, and I had a hard time getting through it. Now we crack into the top 10, and we start off with a screener that I got. The movie is called Martinez, Margaritas, and Murder. This movie had very bad acting, very bad CGI. Basically, it's supposed to be a slasher, but it really fails at that. I don't even think there was that many kills in the movie, if I can remember correctly. Maybe like a couple at that. The characters weren't interesting. The story wasn't all that interesting, and it just was dreadful to sit through. Number 9, we have The Becomers. This is another screener that I got. This is about a bunch of aliens that are on Earth, and they're doing body swapping. It's definitely a very low budget movie. This is the kind of movie that a label like Vinegar Syndrome would probably pick up and release. It's just a very out there film. It's not really my cup of tea, and just some of the acting wasn't all that great. I felt like some of the scenes were kind of awkward, and the ending, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense at points. And just some of the story elements were kind of weird and wacky and really out there. At one point, there is literally somebody having sex with someone, and they have like a starfish for like a hole, so to speak. And there's like paint that looks like there's coming out of them. It was just really laughable, really out there movie, just not for me whatsoever. At number 8, we have Skeletons in the Closet. This might be one of the worst Shudder films that I've ever watched. Cuba Gooding Jr. is in this, and you can tell that he just does like one take with his scene in this film. This has a lot of bad CGI. There's a lot of mixture, a lot of different things with horror that is in here. The wife that is in this film is absolutely terrible at acting. There is points in this movie where they just really just throw everything at the wall and see what actually sticks, and none of it lands. You can tell that this is one of those movies that they must have made in a few days, because the way that it was just put together, it was just awful. I honestly don't remember the ending or what really happened towards the end of the movie, or what really unfolded, to be honest with you, because mainly I saw this way back in February. All I remember is that this thing was just really bad to sit through. Number 7, we have Afraid. Now, this movie is an AI movie, and you can really tell because some of the dialogue definitely feels like it was written by AI. Some of the things that the characters say don't make sense whatsoever, especially John Cho's character. It tries to borrow from Megan, and it fails at that. It has this whole like Siri type thing that is going on, in which it seems like it would be interesting, but it's not. The ending was stupid, and overall, the best part was the end credits and the fact that this was only about 80 minutes in the theater. Number 6, we have Driveaway Dolls. Now, out of any movie that I've seen in the theater this year, this was the one that I really wanted to walk out on. I saw this back in February. The comedy whatsoever did not land for me whatsoever. Margaret Qualley's in this movie, and she's an actress where I've seen other movies from her and I actually like her, but she was absolutely annoying in this role. Geraldine Viswanathan was in this movie as well, and both characters are pretty obnoxious. There's an accent that they have that is very obnoxious. It's pretty much them just kind of going around partying, having sex, and then they have this briefcase, and the reveal of what's inside the briefcase is absolutely laughable. Matt Damon has a brief scene, which I don't know why he's in the movie. Pedro Pascal is killed on early on, like in the first 10-15 minutes of the movie. It was awful to sit through, and I was just really looking forward to honestly walking out on this movie. I haven't done that in quite some time. I somehow stuck it through, but it got worse and worse as the movie went on. We get into the top 5, starting off with another bad Netflix movie. A lot of people like this movie. It's called It's What's Inside. Now, this movie drove me nuts. The characters are very annoying. A lot of times I didn't really know exactly what was going on when we're switching bodies and such. I will give it credit that it does have some interesting cinematography and lighting, but I couldn't get into this movie whatsoever. I'm just watching it, just trying to get through the movie. It reminded me of a ripoff of a Bodies, so to speak, but it didn't capitalize whatsoever. I kind of don't understand the positive reviews for it. I thought it was completely dreadful. Number 4, we have Down Below. Now, I'm not familiar with this director. This is another screener that I got. The opening scene was very promising for this movie, but it all goes downhill from there in this movie, because I don't know what the hell is going on in this movie. There was just so much that they were trying to include in this movie, but I don't even think the script is very coherent. I really struggled to get through this screener. This was one of those screeners that I definitely wanted to shut off and honestly not even review, because I honestly just didn't understand the direction here, or what the director was trying to say, or what really was going on in the movie. Number 3, I'm not really surprised that this movie was bad, but that movie is called Not Another Church Movie. Now, if you remember back in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, we had Epic Movie, Meet the Spartans. This is one of those movies that they tried to bring back in theaters. I avoided it in theaters. I waited till it actually came home to watch it home. And honestly, it's exactly what I thought it would be. There isn't a coherent script here. It's just a bunch of skits that really happen. There's a few little funny parts that kind of made me laugh a little bit, but there's nothing really that I could take out of this movie. I'm not a big Tyler Perry fan, and I know that has some little shed of light that is in this movie that relates to Tyler Perry, but I'm sorry, this movie did not do it for me. This one was truly horrible, and they definitely don't need to make any of these kinds of movies again. Number 2, we have one of the worst slashers that I've seen this year. That is Camp Pleasant Lake. I guess you can say this is the ripoff of Friday the 13th. You have a bunch of adults that go to this camp, kind of like a Friday the 13th, and it has some of the dumbest scenes I've ever seen, especially for the kills. There's this one scene where literally the killer's in the mask, and he's sitting there stabbing people one by one in the circle, and people are thinking that nobody's actually getting killed, yet there's blood everywhere. I don't know what the heck was going on with that. There's portions in here where you have characters that are walking around with a phone with a flashlight, in which there's already bright lights on the screen. It was completely laughable at that point. The way that they stab people, it was not correct, especially when like somebody actually gets slashed in the throat. It isn't lined up correctly where the actual slash mark is. Completely terrible. Number 1, what is the worst movie that I've seen this year? Well, that award is going to go to The Mousetrap. I've heard they're going to make a sequel for this, and honestly, I kind of hope they don't, to be honest. This movie, I sat for about an hour, and then finally we get our first kill in this movie. It's a very paper-thin story. You have all these kids that are at this arcade, kind of like a Chuck E. Cheese, so to speak. The audio is really bad. Some of the dialogue is really bad. The kills aren't really all that great. And overall, it's just not even really that entertaining as a slasher. The story doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Like I said, they're supposedly supposed to do a sequel, but I really hope they don't, because it's absolutely not worth your time to check this movie out. So those are all the movies that I checked out this year that were absolutely dreadful. Did you see any of these bad movies? Do you disagree with any of these on my list? Leave your list down in the comments below of some of the worst movies that you saw this year. Thank you guys for watching as always, and Happy New Year.